This is the second video in a series of videos where I try to argue in favor of Kris being the knight. Each video will be covering a different topic and can be viewed in any order. This video will be covering the scrapped intro concept. Now before I even begin, what even is this unused intro and where did it come from? So when Toby decided to announce Chapter 2's release date, he did so by playing a slightly edited version of Chapter 1. Before the livestream started, there was a 30-minute countdown where Toby played some scrapped Deltarune music with a light description about them. The very last one shared was called Game Main Theme Piano Sketch. And this is what Toby has to say about this piece of music. The arrangement is really early, but I created this thinking of an animated intro for the game similar to Wild Arms. I still see it in my head when I listen to the song. The best part would have been at the end when everyone is running up the staircase as the silhouettes of the bosses from all the chapters show up. And the knight, standing in a white door at the top of the stairs, turns around and looks down at them. Okay, so that's the context. If you didn't know before, then you do now. So people often try to use this to argue against Kris Knight. It also gets brought up as a point against Multi-Knight, but for this video we are only going to be talking about it in relation to Kris Knight. So this is how the argument pretty much always goes. Since Toby was considering making an intro where everyone, with the assumption that everyone means the full party, and they would be in the same room as the knight, then Kris can't be the knight because then there would be two Krises on screen. Now this argument is flawed on basically every level. In fact, it's by far one of the weakest arguments people use to try and say that Kris isn't the knight. For one thing, this is a scrapped idea that was scrapped very early on, so trying to use it as serious evidence at all is questionable at best. But of course, for the sake of the argument, we are going to take it 100% seriously that this was something that Toby was going to do, and was then cut for unknown reasons. So first off, the idea that we can't have two different versions of Kris on screen at the same time in an animated intro cinematic is just objectively wrong, and is a point I can only imagine was created by someone who has never seen a single anime in their life. Nothing that happens in an intro cinematic is meant to be literal, and having a character with another version of themselves in an intro cinematic is super common and happens all the time. Basically, anytime there's a justifiable reason to do it, they will. Don't believe me? Here's a few examples. ReZero, Madoka Magica, Sword Art Online, Future Diary, ReZero again, in the same opening. Yeah, they did it twice, in the same opening. All of these are extremely popular anime, and these are just the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge on every anime and cartoon that was ever made, so there are surely dozens of other examples that I don't even know exists. So again, the main point that people make using this cut intro is just outright wrong in and of itself. But it actually goes so much further than that, because if you actually think about how the intro is described, it not only doesn't hold up as evidence against Kris Knight, it's actually evidence for Kris being the knight. Think about it like this: if you wanted to show off the fact that Kris has two different facets to them, those being them while being controlled by us, and them after they rip out the soul, in an intro cinematic, how else would you do that besides having both of these different Krises on screen? I think, considering that it's such an important plot point, that it would be showcased in the intro in some way. And if soulless Kris's role in the story is to be the knight, then it makes perfect sense to portray it like this. On top of all of that, it also just doesn't even make sense that Toby would even consider making an intro like this if Kris isn't the knight. The whole point of the Kris is not the knight argument is that Kris is just a red herring, and that the real identity of the knight is still a mystery. Even if we assume that we would only see the silhouette of the knight, it would still be impossible to have the identity be a secret. Every single character in the game has a super unique silhouette. It would be impossible to not instantly know who the knight is. Not only would it make Kris as a red herring not work at all for even a second, but it would also spoil the whole mystery of the knight's identity, which people who say Kris isn't the knight claim is the main mystery in the story. But of course, if Kris is the knight, then this intro would be fine, since the knight's identity is not a major mystery, it's a minor one that gets answered at the end of chapter 2. You also might not instantly pick up on the fact that Kris at the top of the stairs is supposed to be Kris as the knight. You might just think it's meant to be Kris without the soul, or just not understand what it means at all. And if you did figure out what it means, then it's not a big deal, because once again, it's revealed at the end of chapter 2. That reveal has a lot of setup anyway. Between the ending of chapter 1 and how Queen tells us that the knight used a knife to make the Dark Worlds, lots of people were able to guess that Kris is the knight just off of this. The intro would just be another hint before the reveal, but it wouldn't spoil the whole game, like how it would with any other character being the knight. And if you don't believe me about people figuring out Kris was the knight before the reveal, here's an example.
The night. The roaring night. Today it deigned to create this world. Reaching its long hand to the sky, it coursed its will into its blade, and made, thrusting the fountain from the earth. Unfortunately, the world they create... Maybe Kris is the knight. Because Kris has a knife. Fortunately, the world they created is trapped within the confines of the library. If only we had a way to make more darkness, we might be able to cover the whole world. That is when I realized this power of the will, this power of determination. Determination? Is this not something that all Lightners possess? If one was simply determined enough, could not anyone make it dark? See, determination? Kris must be the knight. Because Kris is the only human, and humans have determination. And Kris has a knife. Knife? You are opening a dark fountain in your own house? So you are the knight. Presumably. As suspected.
I mean, come on, if a real-life anime girl can figure this out, what's your excuse? And on top of all of that, the chapter bosses would be there as well. So if Kris isn't the knight, then what would the chapter 3 boss be doing there, just chilling with a character he has nothing to do with? Like, if another character makes a dark fountain after Kris is shown to be the knight, then that would likely be a twist of some kind. But doing that before the knight is shown off, and we know that Kris isn't the knight because they don't match the silhouette of the character at the top of the stairs, who would clearly be the knight in this context, would just be weird. So to reiterate, the idea that we can't have two different Krises in an intro cinematic is outright wrong, and the fact that Toby even considered making this intro at all completely contradicts the idea that the knight is meant to be a game-long whodunit mystery. Though once again, it was scrapped. Likely very early on. The whole thing never made it past the idea phase. In fact, it's possible that Toby never actually intended to have the animated intro, and it was just a thing he imagined in his head, that he never intended to have made. So, you know, make of it what you will, I guess. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, it would mean a lot to me if you'd leave a like and subscribe if you're not already. If you really love my videos, then you can consider supporting me over on Ko-Fi. I don't make any money off the videos, so the money that people give on that is the only money I make on these videos. If you want to chat with me directly, I have a community Discord server where we all talk about Kris Knight and other Deltarune stuff, so if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the description. Also, I made a Blue Sky account, so if you're interested in following me there, there's a link to that in the description. But anyway, thanks for watching the video. But this whole thing does make me more excited for the eventual final release of Chapter 7 and stuff. Just so, when it does come out, you know, somebody will absolutely go ahead and animate this intro like how Toby described it. And, you know, we'd get to see all the silhouettes of the chapter bosses and stuff. With Kris at the top of the stairs. It'll be cool. It will be cool. Trust me, it's gonna be cool. It'll happen.